G'day, I'm Patrick from Douglas Fur Design. Welcome to the Router Bits. We want to create these matched recess finger pulls. Now it's important that they're in exactly the same position, because if your doors open and close and they're in a different position, they'll look like you did a terrible job. So getting these in exactly the same position is actually a little bit tricky, but by using a setting block and a spacing block that are measured for whatever length of cupboard and length of recess you're going for, you can make this whole setup a lot simpler. So I'll go into how to choose the length of these and then how to use them. It gets a bit mathy, but I'll just do it as simply as possible. I won't go into setting up the depth and the fence of the router bit. There's a whole video about using these finger pull bits. Watch that. Just know that I'm using the smallest finger pull bit with some 19mm stock, and I've set the fence back a little bit from the finger pull bit so that I can go right in deep like this. But if you watch the other video, you'll get all of those basics. Our cupboard doors are 400mm long, just because that's what I'm using for my test pieces. And I've marked on the position of the recess, which is going to be 90mm long and 100mm from what would be, I assume, the top of the cabinet or the bottom, depending on where you're going to put it. Now, these numbers are really important because they help us determine the length of our setting piece and our spacing piece. Basically, the setting piece is the distance from the top of the cupboard to the bottom of the recess, so 100mm plus 90mm, minus 14.5mm. Now that 14.5 is specific to this particular smallest finger pull bit. It's a little complicated as to why it's 14.5, but basically the measurement we want to match up with the narrowest part of the router bit, because that's what we see, but what we're actually measuring off is the widest part of the router bit, because that's what protrudes the furthest. But as long as you're using this bit, it will be 14.5mm. So the setter is the distance from the top plus the length of the recess minus 14.5mm. We use this piece to place up against the router bit and then bring our hard stop up against that chunk of wood. Then we use our spacer to set the next bit. To determine the length of the spacer, you have to get the length of the cupboard plus the length of the recess minus 10mm. And now it's 10mm because that is the width of the narrowest part of this router bit. So we've got 400 plus 90 minus 10 brings us to 480mm, and that is the length of our spacer that we use to set the back stop, the back hard stop. Once we have them set, we can get our first piece and turn the router on, push it in slowly, run it all the way to the end. It might behoove you to place some tape over this edge, because that's where you might get tear out at that back edge. When we go to do our next piece, as I described earlier, you just do all of that in reverse. You place the setting piece on the right-hand side instead of the left, and then you set the left-hand hard stop using the spacing bar. I'll run through these now, and hopefully they all match up. They match perfectly. You would have seen in when I was routing that I actually dug out one end first and then the other carefully, and then continued to remove all of the center material. I did that mainly to avoid tear out, specifically on the back end, and you have to be held these down really firmly and make sure you have really good control of them, because even though there is a fence there, you're almost doing a little bit of freehand routing. Do a test piece, as always. If you're getting a lot of tear out, you're going to have to figure out some way of solving that problem, whether it's putting a piece of sacrificial material on the front or using masking tape like I did. Give it a shot. I think this works really well. It's fairly simple except for the mathy part at the start, and you get a really nice result which actually matches. So this would be really handy if you had a big cabinet, had a bunch of doors to do, and you want them all to match the whole way along. This is the only way to do it in my mind. This is just one of the router bits for finger pulls. There's a whole video on doing different finger pull designs using this one and other router bits. There's a link for that below. There's also a link below to buy this router bit, or you can jump on the website at timbecon.com.au or pick it up in the Melbourne or the Perth store.